Hi everyone, my name is Richard Baskeyfield and I'm the P7 tutor here at Phoenix Financial Trading. I would just like to talk to you today about some potential areas that could come up in the exam for this sitting, some things to look out for, some areas that you should be focusing on. I'd just like to first of all start off this video by potentially issuing a word of warning to everybody who's sitting the exam for this sitting. The exam last time was a good exam for students. It was the highest pass rate globally for P7 for a number of years. It was in the 40%, well, I think it was 42% region. The examiner said at the start of the year that the exam, or the pass rate of the exam, was no fluke. It wasn't that the examiner didn't expect it to go up to this region. What I would take from that is, if the examiner has sort of set this exam that they're expecting a higher pass rate, I think what's going to level it out this time is a potentially tough and challenging P7 exam. I would therefore, if I was a student, be prepared for such matters. So when I'm practicing these questions, don't shy away from these difficult areas. Read the examiner's comments. Read the examiner's comments for the questions, especially in section B, where students have not chosen these questions, the least popular questions. I would be tackling these questions head on, and I would be spending time going over the areas that students usually find difficult. So the exam itself follows the same format as always. We have got section A, we've got section B. Section A of the exam has got two compulsory questions. We've got a 35-mark question and we've got a 25-mark question. This sets us up for 60% of the exam, which is compulsory. We then come on to section B, where you have two questions out of three to choose from, each slightly smaller in length, 20 marks each to get you up to that 100% or 100 marks that you have to complete in the exam. Let's start by looking at section A then. Now, section A is going to be your longest question. It's got a detailed scenario and it normally focuses on the planning phase of the audit. So you'd normally, in the exam, you're going to have an email from the partner, you're the audit manager, and you've got to respond to that email. Normally in the form of briefing notes, but it could be in the form of planning notes to the seniors and the other members of the audit team. This is where you're going to get the professional marks, the layouts, heading it up, introducing, summarising what's going on. The areas that could potentially come this time in question one, I would think it's either going to focus on the sort of the traditional single company type scenario, where you have a single company, you are hit with this information in the exam, and you have to identify the audit risks for this company. Now, this could be, if the examiner's being nicer to us, be in the form of a number of risks, number of paragraphs. You pick out those risks and identify the risk of material misstatement or the audit risk. It could be in the form of one of the harder exams when they had a single company, where instead of giving you a whole host of risks, they might just give you 2 or 3 risks, and from that you need to provide a more detailed analysis. The other potential area I would be aware of as a student would be the examiner asking us for analytical procedures and audit risk. So this involves us calculating some ratios to begin with, doing some slight interpretation of these ratios. Don't go overboard. It's not a financial accounting exam. Let's just look for some trends. Let's look for some areas where we potentially could be thinking this could be going higher or lower, or increasing or decreasing. If it doesn't fit in with your knowledge, then we can link it back. It could then be over or understated from an audit point of view. The rest of the question then would go down the traditional route. Once we've done this analytical review, we're then going to go through each paragraph in detail, picking out the potential accounting standard, picking out the potential area that could be materially misstated. Typical question in number 1 would start off with the audit risk, then leading us on to a part B and C, where they could then pick up on one of these risks from the scenario and ask you then to design audit procedures to mitigate that risk to an acceptable level. You could then potentially get a part C, where you have additional information on potentially some sort of ethical and professional consideration, and you would then need to use your knowledge about the potential ethical threats, the potential professional threats of this new piece of information coming along. It's normally in the form of some sort of other assurance assignment that the client's asking us to do, and we have to make these considerations. Section 2 in the exam, a lot more unpredictable. It is a lot more unpredictable to say what can come up. Now, traditionally, I'm just going to take away the last exam for a second. Traditionally, apart from the last exam, section, or question 2, should I say, has had another assignment appearing in it. The last exam sort of came again left field and brought in a slightly different question, and that it gave multiple scenarios and it had matters to be considered. If we were going for the more traditional route of what the examiner's done in the past, I would expect a longer question based on another assignment. The other assignment that's not come up for a number of years that could come up this sitting could be some part of forensic investigation. I'd start off by saying there's a really good article online about forensic investigations. I'd be aware of that as a student. I'd be practicing the forensic investigations that have appeared in the past exams, and I'd be ready to think about, what do I need to consider before I accept a fraud investigation? What do I need to consider when I'm planning a fraud investigation? And then lastly, where you've got to be ready in the exam and you will be put under pressure, what procedures do I have to do when I'm performing some sort of fraud investigation? You could potentially have in your question 2 as well, the examiner could bring in a grouped question. So you could then consider maybe some planning implications of a group, or it could go down some risks of you auditing a group company, or maybe when you're relying on the work of a component of the group. I'd also potentially be aware maybe in question 2 of some sort of quality control question, where your audit senior's done some work, you're the manager conducting some sort of either hot file review or cold file review, and you've got to discuss the quality control implications. Coming on to section B, you've got the choice out of 2 out of 3. I'll go through the traditional routes of these questions to begin with. 3 traditional questions, or 3 of the most common questions that appear here, are explain the matters to be considered, ethical considerations and professional considerations, and lastly, audit reports. These 3 areas are pretty much core to P7. If you've not had an ethics question in the first 2 questions, then expect a fully fledged 20-mark question in the section B. Again, another common question is your matters to be considered. So you're reviewing your audit senior's work, so we need to think about materiality, our standards, the audit evidence that we would expect to find within that work. So that's going to focus again heavily on some sort of accounting standard. So let's make sure we've got that good, strong accounting standards knowledge there. And again, lastly, the other common area, like I said, was my audit reports. Normally question 5. I'd say my prediction for the audit report question would be centered around a group audit, where potentially you've got an error or a material error in the subsidiary, and then how that can then impact the group audit opinion. I'd also again be aware of potential them asking the single company again, maybe some sort of other matters that could appear, so you've got some sort of inconsistency with information outside of your financial statements, how that could potentially impact your audit opinion. The other areas that I would say, smaller areas that could come up as a part B or a part C. The first one, I'd say really actually, although it's not really a smaller area, something that the examiner brought to, I think, tutors' attention and students' attention. It was about a year ago. The examiner released an article and said students sitting P7 should be aware of current developments. And then the examiner then released an article about those current developments. That was then examined a year ago, question 5, part A. Since that, a year later, the examiner has released another article immediately before our exam on current issues. I would say to every student, we need to be reading that article, we need to ensure we understand the article. For all Phoenix students, I have got a summary of the article, highlighting the key points, highlighting areas in the exam that I think will be coming up, that I will email to you all very shortly. I would be on top of that article. I have emailed it and mentioned it to my students. Everyone else who is not part of Phoenix, I would advise you all to have a read of that. I'll just end then by touching on these other smaller areas. I'd be thinking about a potential question on relying on the work of internal auditors. It was new to the syllabus last time in the respect of relying on the work of internal auditors has been in there for a number of sittings. What they brought into the syllabus last time is where auditors can direct the work of the internal auditors. So we need to ensure, when can we do that? What type of areas can we get them to do the work on our behalf? Is it allowable? What is the process that we have to go down? I'd also think about the auditor's responsibilities in terms of the risks associated with initial engagements. What are those specific risks that we have with initial engagements that we don't potentially have with ongoing engagements? So things like opening balances, contacting the outgoing auditors, know your client checklist, maybe some money laundering procedures. Finally, I'll say another smaller area would potentially be understanding the audit client and its environment. So again, it's sort of, it really follows on from understanding an initial engagement, going through that know your client checklist. What do we need to do in terms of understanding the control activities? What do we need to do in terms of understanding the risks associated to the industry? What kind of work is involved? Even before we get to the planning of the audit risks, what do we need to do in terms of understanding the environment? For everyone who's listened to the video and everybody who's sitting for P7 in the current sitting, I wish you all the very best of luck in the exam. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.